do want to start right at 7:45 last night when Mr. Card was located deceased from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and that did occur at the Maine Recycling Corporation, and that's at 61 Capitol Ave in Lisbon. And we're going to try to put that right up here on the screen. The audio visual is a little better than the chalkboard we had on day one. So this should show a map, a Google map location of where the Maine Recycling Corporation is located at. And I wanted to show this. This is the primary reason that we're late, because we were trying to get this switched over from Google Maps to something that you could utilize. So when you look at this, there's a triangle here. That stop right there. Yeah, exactly. That triangle is, in fact, the Maine Recycling Corporation. And if we go down across Capitol Avenue to where that circle is, that's the overflow parking location where he was found deceased in a trailer. So, and I think that's important because we were asked some good questions last night that we did not have the answers to at that point. So that particular location was cleared twice previously, and it was cleared in that triangle. It was cleared where the business is located, and that was cleared by Chief McGee and the Lisbon Police Department and individuals there earlier, and a joint or a combination tactical team later in the afternoon. The owner of that facility did a great job because he was like, you know, this individual knows the property. He could be tucked in the back of one of these trailers because they're full of recycled metal and all this stuff. You could crawl over the top. Well, we cleared the trailers. We cleared trailers that are there on that business footprint. Nobody had any idea that across the street, across Capitol Avenue, there's an overflow parking lot, which is the Recycling Corporation property. So the owner was very diligent to say, well, did you clear those trailers? Well, what trailers are you talking about? So then the follow-up is with the tactical team commanders to say, okay, tell me exactly where you were at. And then they were doing the same thing. We were looking at our timeline. We cleaned trailers. We didn't clear those. Let's go back. So the Maine State Police tactical team ultimately were the ones that located the body within one of those trailers. And this is a tractor trailer style. You know, you picture that 18-wheeler. This is what a trailer would look like. A box trailer is where he was located, right in the back of that. Some of those trailers are locked. Some of those trailers aren't. So he was found inside one of those boxes that was unlocked from the outside. And that you can probably picture that from just your experience on the street, right? You've seen those kind of things before. So that's where we found the body last night. A little bit of updates in that regard. We're going to be there probably through the end of the day, making sure that we process that particular scene. And we'll also be at the bar and grill and the bowling alley probably through the rest of the weekend. We're currently working that now, and we will definitely be working that tomorrow. And at this point, that is heavily resourced by evidence response team members, so ETs are processing physical evidence at those locations. Again, as we've discussed, there's a reason for that. That's a lot of material still there to work with. So we expect that we'll work through the weekend there. I would also just tell you that the behind-the-scenes stuff is a very intensive manhunt, an incredible amount of resources invested. Once he's located last night, truth be told, we got some people some rest. Hopefully you got some sleep last night. So we sent some people home. They're back in this morning, all in for today. We're going to send them back to get some rest tomorrow. They can see their families and be back in on Monday, the entire team, to include our partners, which I am going to take more time today to make sure that I acknowledge everybody that I can. So they'll be back in on Monday to continue their work, whether it's scene cleanup, continuing to do interviews. Overall, we received 821-ish as of a little while ago, tips and leads, so we continue to work those. The digital tip line, that video tip line that you were so helpful in putting the information out on, ultimately we're at 197 of those leads, and that information that was uploaded to that system. Got about a dozen or so search warrants that are completed, so signed and impounded meaning that you wouldn't have access to them at this point. But given the circumstances here, right, second, because we don't envision a trial of any sort for anybody that's involved here. The release of information, I would expect after those affidavits, that impound is pulled, there's going to be a lot of information that's going to be there for you down the road. Again, we'll try to do the best we can today. Now that that piece of this event is done and he's been found, we're certainly able to answer additional questions. Everything we say can be interpreted by a suspect. They just said this about me, I'm going to go do that. And again, based on the violent nature of what occurred here, the traumatic incidents that occurred here in Lewiston, we were certainly concerned right into the last second that we didn't know what this individual was going to do next or where he was going to do it. So we need to be very cautious about that. We also need to be very cautious when you talk about trials, one information. So Mike's at the podium and he said this, and then at trial 2 years later they say, well, didn't you say this and now you think this because you found it in a cell phone. All those things, we need to make sure that we're not being prejudicial for trials and for the court process. I would also say that once we clear these scenes, and I want to make sure I acknowledge this individual, Mike Halloran, who's a retired law enforcement officer out of Mass, owns a trauma service cleanup company. And Mike gives us a shout and says, you know, when you clear those scenes, I'm willing to come up and donate the services of my company to clean all of these crime scenes, which, as you can imagine, or probably can't imagine, is an incredibly traumatic process to begin with. So we clear the scenes. We have all the evidence that we need. This company is going to come up, the Trauma Service Cleanup Company with Mike Halloran. They'll do the cleanups, and then we'll release those locations back to the owners so that they're not forced to deal with that first thing when they walk back into something, their hopes and dreams. I always wanted to open a bar, and they're going to be surrounded by the chaos that would have occurred that evening. So that will be the next steps there. So that's probably early next week. I gave you a little bit of information reference to the detectives, the major crime units, and all of our federal partners that are working with us there. We will be transitioning from our current command post back to the Lewiston Police Department. As you might imagine, the parking lot was a little bit different today than it was yesterday, right? So our command post, the next big step for the incident management team is to kind of demobilize. I think when these things happen, the first piece is we don't have enough people to do the work we need to do. And then the second piece is we have so many people to do the work that we can do. How can we track them? How can we feed them? Where are they at, and are they safe? So we're going to be fully invested in the demobilization of that location and the personnel that are involved throughout today and into tomorrow. So I do want to touch on a couple other questions that have been asked along the way. And with clearance from our prosecutors and our detectives, we're certainly more comfortable answering now based on the current outcome of what happened last night. So one thing. There's been a number of completely legitimate questions about a note that was found in his residence. So this is a paper-style note. I'm not going to read it to you verbatim, but what it is it's a note to a loved one and is saying that this is the passcode for my phone, this is the bank account numbers, and I wouldn't describe it as a explicit suicide note, but the tone and tenor was that the individual was not going to be around and wanted to make sure that this loved one had access to his phone and whatever was in his phone. We're working on that now to get into the phone. That's one of those search warrants. That's one of those very specialized skill set that our folks have. And then the bank codes to make sure that that happens. That's not uncommon in suicide situations. You get long notes, you get very set up scenarios, but that's something that you asked about, and I do appreciate that. And again, we can talk about that a little bit more now. There was a firearm found in the white Subaru station wagon. That was a long gun style. I don't not have the make and model. You could ask me, is that an AR-15 or is that a this? I don't know that. But I was asked yesterday specifically, did they find a gun? Did we find a gun in the car? And we did. And that was a long gun. And to my understanding, that was the only firearm that was found inside the car at that time. I would expect, again, based on the investigation and the outcome, that when these impounded affidavits are released, there'll be search warrant lists, and they'll have all kinds of stuff. What did we find, and how many of this, and how many of that? So that'll be much more detailed. So did you find guns in the house? Did you find guns on him? So that is something that we've been asked about, and I wanted to make sure that we covered that as well. Another question that I've had some conversations around this morning. You know, if you talk about, is there a motive here, right? I think clearly there's a mental health component to this. We still need to do some research around trying to get access to certain records and things of that nature. Which, again, you could probably imagine is not just as simple as just calling somebody, hey, can you send me this thing? But what I would say is that based on what I've heard through conversations this morning, I don't see, or I'm told that we don't have access to any forcibly committed for treatment information reference to Mr. Card, okay? So you can volunteer, as an example, to go to a facility and seek treatment for months on end. But if you're not forcibly committed to seek that treatment, and it's very specific to treatment, right? Not forcibly taken for an evaluation is completely different than treatment. So there are a lot of very specific criteria around firearms, and are you a possessed person, or prohibited person rather, and what that looks like. So in this scenario, we have not seen to this point, I have not seen to this point, that Mr. Card was forcibly committed for treatment. And if that didn't happen, then the NICS check, you could go into a firearms dealer who does all of their work, and the background check is not going to ping that this individual is prohibited. And something that's incredibly important for us to say, and for me to say, and I find myself saying it on a regular basis, just because there's appears to be a mental health nexus to this scenario, the vast majority of people, with a mental health diagnosis will never hurt anybody. They won't hurt themselves. They're not a danger to the community. Based on percentages alone, there's a bunch of folks in here that have a mental health diagnosis. I know law enforcement officers that have a mental health diagnosis. That doesn't mean they're a danger to the community. We certainly have people that reach that crisis level where that does occur, and we deal with those folks on a regular basis, sometimes through involuntary forcible commitments, right? And sometimes not. Sometimes there's different levels of that mental health system, and that's a whole different conversation that can be quite lengthy. And I can tell you that law enforcement has been involved at this point for decades, and heavily involved over the last 15 years or so. I was asked about cooperation of the family at one point. This family has been incredibly cooperative with us. Truth be told, I think the first 3 people that called us to positively identify this individual based on the photos that were released were family members. And unfortunately, what happens in a scenario like this is that this happens, they're connected to this family, and that family has taken a great deal of grief, to include threats, people hanging out at their houses, and saying, do they know? Is it their fault? Are they enabling? All of those things. Our investigation would have been it would have been detrimental if they didn't come forward immediately to let us know who this individual was. And how difficult a decision is that to make? When you've lost this many people, it's not that difficult, but you can imagine that my family member was involved in that traumatic event, and I want to let people know. So that they should be acknowledged in that. Again, I won't specify exactly who the family members were, but as a whole, we found them to be very, very cooperative.
Based on what you've learned so far, why did the suspects target the bowling alley and the bar?
I would say that the mental health aspect of this, there's a piece of that where there's paranoia, there's some conspiracy theorist piece that I think of what I've read and what I've seen is that the individual felt like people were talking about him. It may even appear that there were some voices in play here. And we don't believe that any of that is accurate. I think that led him specifically back to those two specific locations. And it also led us to, where's he going next? He used to work here, he used to be there, and what's that going to ultimately look like? So I think that's a valid question. Right here?
Well, Commissioner, can you go back to the recycling center?
Yeah.
What was the suspect's connection to that facility? Was he a former employee?
There was an employment relationship there at some point. I don't know if he was currently employed or not, and I don't think I'm in a position to answer that. I would kind of lean towards the business owner, and he's been part of this very forthcoming that got us back to that location to check. So I don't want to speak on his behalf of exactly where Mr. Carr's or what his status was at the end.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.